So, in talking about all this stuff, there's actually a theme that kind of goes through this that I don't know if you might not have quite caught yet. Anyone? The theme is that we as humans and how we work, a lot of this depends on what are we paying attention to? What are we focusing on? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about cognitics and locus of attention. Very, very fancy words for something we do every day. All right, so let me ask you a question. What is easier to understand? The machine side of a human-machine interface, in other words, the technology and how the technology works, or the human side and how humans tend to work? Which do you think is easier to understand and design for? Right, so that actually is correct. Typically, it's really the machine side that's easier. It's more logical, right? It tends to not be as varied as humans. You know, look at us humans. How similar are we? Right, there are some things that, yeah, they're kind of similar, but there's an enormous amount of variety. There's an enormous amount of complexity. Humans are much more complex than computer systems these days. Some will argue, well, one day computers will get there. Others will say no, because we don't even understand enough about us as humans. How are computers going to get there if we're not even there with our understanding? It's actually a lot more difficult to design for a human than it is for another computer. Significantly more. Even with what we know today. Now, we have talked about a lot of things that are fairly consistent in terms of how we work as humans. Makes things easier. But even knowing that, there are actually a lot of human factors, a lot of things about us as humans that are actually independent of things that we may initially think are really important. So age, gender is a big one, cultural background, level of expertise. There are a lot of times where you're going to be designing a system where those things don't matter at all. Okay, let's look at gender and gaming. Who's familiar with gender and gaming? Who's familiar with gaming? Okay, you guys are like, yeah, I'm not going to admit this. Okay, who's heard of Portal? Yes, who thinks Portal is awesome? Yes! Okay, at least some of you will know what I'm talking about. How many of you think that only males play Portal? You guys are brilliant. The gaming industry is one that has a lot of stereotypes. When most people think of gaming, what do they think? Who's the typical gamer? Young guys. You're in your parents' basement. All you do is play games all day. How accurate is that? It's actually not accurate. Even if you take out you're in your parents' basement. Okay, the living room. You're in your parents' living room. How accurate is that to describe even the majority of gamers, do you think? You think it is? Guess what? You're wrong. Yeah, so the average age is much older than we think. And we've now reached a place where there are more female gamers than there are male gamers. I'm sorry? It could be. I don't play Candy Crush myself. Right? But we think of gamers as these young males, and if you look at the reality is that most gamers are either neither male nor are they teenagers. Because 27 to 35 is still very young. And sprightly. A young adult, yes. So if you're going to start creating and designing a game based on what you think you know about 18-year-olds, how big is your customer base compared to what it is in reality? It's smaller. That's also why gaming has evolved so much. Is there anyone here who ever played or heard of Zork? Zork? That was, I think that was what the first, it was a texting game, kind of like a, I don't know if you would really call it a role-playing game, but it basically was the first texting game. I actually first saw it on a CPM machine. Who's heard of a CPM machine? Okay, if you go to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., you'll see one. I was very young, by the way. Right, it was basically a text game where it would essentially you didn't have graphics. It would literally describe to you, you are in a cave. It is dripping water on the left, or to the north. You have a door on the left. You have another chasm on the right. What is your quest? Oh yeah, I can't even remember what the quest was, but. And then you have to tell it what you're going to do. Are you going to go drink some water and get sick and die? Are you going to go to the chasms? Are you going to go to that door? Now, granted, I was a little bit of an anomaly at the time, but how many females do you think actually were playing Zork? Yeah, very few at the time. It actually was the case that at the time it was very, very few. Look at the differences now. So when you're designing, you do need to think about putting aside these stereotypes and thinking about us as humans and what's really important in terms of what I'm designing. Who really is my customer base? Right? What do we know about things like human learning that is going to be consistent across my users? What do we know about how we deal with information that's going to be consistent across my users, knowing who your users are? Now, we've talked about ergonomics, right? Ergonomics is basically the design guidelines for products that involve physical interaction. Right? It's been around a while. There are a lot of guidelines. They tend to be pretty straightforward. But there's also something that's called Cognitics, which is essentially ergonomics of the mind, or cognitive engineering. And that's basically looking at or studying our mental abilities. A lot of people argue you're taking kind of like an engineering approach, looking at the engineering scope of this. Because the process of thinking and approaching how you design for ergonomics is very, very similar to how you design for how we work mentally, how we interact with things. So with Cognitics and cognitive engineering, we need to think about what do we do when it comes to how we think about things. Makes sense. That's what we should do. Right? Except, again, the problem is that when we look at a lot of interfaces, that's not how they're designed. They're not designed as if we have a good understanding of how things like short-term memory work or long-term memory. Right? They tend to be designed in ways that assumes that we have these cognitive capabilities that we don't have, like our short-term memory will last a whole 5 minutes. Does anyone remember how long short-term memory tends to last? Actually, it's seconds. Yeah, 10 to 15 seconds. And that's it. That's your short-term memory. We're not even talking about your perceptual systems, where you're using something like, rehearsal. It's very, very short. So I want you to think about that when it comes to designing an interface. So I'm going to give you a test later. All right. Now, we can design successful interfaces. There are a lot of companies that do. Right? We want to keep in mind what the human mind can and can't do, how long it takes us to mentally process information and do things, as well as physically do things. And here's another important one. What increases the likelihood of mistakes? Because we have specific ways that we do things very well and others that, all right, we do have some limitations. Part of this is you want to look at what's called the cognitive conscious and cognitive unconscious. Because when we get information, we process it in very different ways depending on what type of information it is and what we're going to do with it. Now, there's a whole other science behind it, motivation and all sorts of other things, which you don't have to worry about in this class. But what is it that we're really talking about? The cognitive unconscious. Information that you know but are not accessing at the current moment. In other words, you're not conscious of it. It's knowledge that you already have. Right? It's what you learned, hopefully, in your classes in the spring that you're not thinking of right at this moment. It's things like knowing how to ride a bicycle. You don't have to think about it. But that knowledge is there. Now, you do have some control in making unconscious thoughts conscious. That's called something simple, called remembering. So if I ask you, what did you eat for breakfast this morning? Who remembers what you ate for breakfast this morning? Who was thinking of it before I asked you that question? One, two people. You must be really hungry. You need more breakfast. That's an example of bringing the unconscious to the conscious. And then, of course, there's the cognitive conscious. This is information that you are currently aware of and using, so you're conscious of it. Yeah, so the breakfast that I asked you to think about, you're now conscious of your breakfast. Here's the thing you want to remember. Even though we have some control over making unconscious thoughts conscious, we cannot deliberately make conscious thoughts unconscious. I can tell you, don't think about the fact that there's a projector over here. Now, don't think about that. Who's being successful? One person. You're either really, really good or I need to work on those things more. All right, so there are different levels of control when it comes to the conscious and the unconsciousness, different levels of capabilities. Do you think this is going to make a difference in interface design? I hope you're saying yes, except I don't want to tell you because I think it's going to be wrong. Actually, yes, the answer to that is absolutely. How we operate on information is very different, and that's going to make an effect on how we design our interfaces. Cognitive consciousness operates sequentially. Right? We are conscious of only between 4 and 8 distinct thoughts at once. It's not as expansive as some people seem to believe. And conscious memory fades in at most a few seconds. It does not last very long. Now, here's something that I want you to really remember when it comes to consciousness that a lot of students tend to forget. The consciousness is very good at handling branching tasks. What are those? Basically making decisions. Raskin talks about making decisions between two actions, 2 tasks. We actually can be 3 tasks or 4 tasks. You have to have that information in your awareness to make a decision and to reason about it. But we also have a tendency to do something that can be good or bad, which is we form habits. Right, we all have our habits. With repetition, a conscious branching task may become unbranching and automatic. In other words, it becomes a habit. Think about when you drive. When you first drove, what were you doing? You're paying attention to everything. My hands are on the wheel. My foot is on the gas. Right? Oh, wait, am I in gear? Yes. Okay, I have to remember to look at my mirrors every however many seconds it's supposed to be. Oh, wait, where's my turn signal? Now, how do you drive? Getting to drive. Right? Oh, hopefully you're not texting, but some people are like, yeah, I'm texting as I'm driving. Not a good idea, by the way. Are we thinking about how we're placing our hands on the steering wheel? No. Even are we thinking about whether we're using our turn signals? Yeah, in Miami, in Florida, yeah, nobody uses turn signals. Actually, you find the people that use turn signals either are worried about their driving or they turned it into a habit. And usually if they turn into the habit, sometimes you'll see that they put their turn signal on just because the road curves. Have you seen that? I've done that. I was like, what are you doing? I I happen to use my turn signals. I'm an anomaly. Actually, I learned that when I lived in Texas. Everyone uses turn signals there. They're very weird. All right, so you want to remember that things that we are learning, for example, are in our consciousness. Once it's learned, it may become automatic. Yes? That's a little bit more simplistic to make a habit. A habit usually tends to be a sequence of actions. So in that case, there are people in the military, for example, who get themselves into the habit of scanning their environment every, I don't know, 10 seconds, however long, where initially you do have to, pay attention and prompt yourself to do that. I suppose you could do the same thing with every 10 seconds I'm going to notice whether there's a projector or not. I'm not sure why you do that, but I would suppose it's, it's possible, and that could be considered a habit. But generally, that's not something you would do. It's more things such as driving. That's a great question. I've never gotten that question before. All right, so I have a nice table. This makes a fabulous midterm exam question where we're comparing the conscious and unconscious. So, the conscious tends to be engaged by novelty, things that are new, things we haven't seen before. So if I'm standing here lecturing and someone opens the door and slams the door, that's not something you're used to in this class. That could be considered novel. Most of the people will turn around and look. Emergencies, right? You're driving along in your car. Someone runs a stop sign in front of you. Suddenly you notice. Danger. Actually, use that my last example. Oh my God, my car is going to get squished. You're not thinking about, of course, I may be in the hospital. You're worried about your car. Right? Those are the things that can really just grasp our attention. The unconscious is engaged by repetition, expected events, when you're feeling safe. So if we look at our car example, right, we feel completely comfortable as we're getting in the car and driving along. All right, I'm driving home. It's natural. It's in my unconscious, but I still know how to do it. The consciousness tends to be used more in new circumstances, whether the unconscious is more used in routine circumstances. The consciousness can handle decisions. The unconscious handles non-branching tasks. The unconscious is not the one that's making the decisions. It's not reasoning about information. I'm not talking about like an immediate reaction. I'm talking about being able to process information. The consciousness accepts logical propositions. The unconscious will accept logical propositions or inconsistencies. Now you're probably wondering what that is, right? Let me give you an example that's the most common. There are a lot of times where people have various religious beliefs that are inconsistent with their behavior. Does that make sense? Well, we know what happens, right? The unconscious, when they are behaving in a way that's inconsistent with their religious beliefs, they're not thinking about it. It's in their unconscious. There's a whole science behind all of that also, by the way. It's very interesting. It's not just religious beliefs. That's the one that most people can relate to. The consciousness operates sequentially, the unconscious simultaneously. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. The consciousness, the controls are volition. You have control over it. The unconscious is more habits, automatic responses. The capacity of the consciousness is teeny, teeny, tiny compared to the unconsciousness. In fact, we actually don't even know what the capacity of the unconsciousness is. Now, some of you will say, well, yeah, but I've seen stories where they say that the brain is 10 bazillion terabytes. I don't know. Right? That's actually an estimation based on computer modeling. We have no way to actually test that to see if it's true. We can't really say how big it is. We don't know. And consciousness persists for as little as tenths of a second. Unconsciousness, arguably, can last an entire lifetime. depending on the information. Now, a really important part of all of this is attention, our locus of attention. And what is the locus of attention? A feature or object in the physical world or an idea about which you are intently and actively thinking. I'll simplify it for you. It's what you're paying attention to. How many of you heard of a locus of control? Yeah, so that's basically how much control you think you have over something, over your life, over your health, those sorts of things. Same thing with attention, that's what we're talking about. So with locus of attention, it's just what are you paying attention to? Now, we do have a lot of control over our locus of attention, but it's not complete. There are things that are going to suddenly draw our attention from other things, such as the example I gave where if you're sitting here intently paying attention to me because I'm such a fabulous professor and I'm so interesting, and someone goes in and slams the door, what has happened to your attention? It's now switched. But we didn't have control over that, but we can switch it back. We see in here much more than whatever happened, what's going on in the world that we're not paying attention to, right? There's still a lot going on, but we're not always aware of everything else. Our perception and our memory is not like a camera or even, a movie clip where we take all of that information in. Sometimes we will be so focused on something that we completely miss what's going on around us. We're able to tune things out. So I actually do this all the time. I'm walking down the hallway, thinking intently of something. A student walks by me, so, oh, hi, professor. I keep going. They come to my office hours later. What did I do? Why are you mad at me? What are you talking about? I said hi to you, and you had this look on your face. You completely ignored me. Oh, sorry. By the way, if I do that to you, that's why. It's not personal. Why? Because I was so focused on whatever I happened to be thinking about or whatever I happened to be doing. So we can tune things out. Now, sometimes people will say, all right, well, what about this idea where, hypnosis? You can go in hypnosis and you will recall everything. Who thinks that's actually true? It's actually not. It's a really controversial area as to how much of it is true and isn't. And what you find in some of the controlled studies is that it's not an image, it's not a picture. And our perceptual memory actually doesn't last very long. It lasts even it's even shorter than short-term memory. Right? So it's an extremely brief period of time. So a great way to understand it is when we look at movie clips and we look at the frames per second. Are you guys familiar with that? All right, so when you are looking at a movie and you're watching this movie, it looks continuous to us, right? Is it actually continuous? It's not. You have frames. If the frames are fast enough, then it looks continuous to us, even though it's not, because you're taking advantage of how our perception works and how short our perception and our perceptual senses actually are. Now, if you make that frame rate too slow, do you start noticing? Yeah, you do. You make it fast enough, then you don't notice, because it's taking advantage of that human capability. But it also shows us that what we are perceiving is not continuous, and it does not last very long at all. As I mentioned, perceptions do not automatically become memories. We have to work at it if we want it to become memories. We need to pay attention to it. We need to engage in memory techniques. And even when we do that, it tends to decay. So I could be standing here talking to you, have a full conversation with you. I'll walk out. Someone can ask me what color your shirt was. And what do you think I'll answer? I don't know. Did I perceive it as I was standing there? Sure. You ask me what color your shirt is as you're standing in front of me? I will know. Even stick me under hypnosis, I'm not going to know what color your shirt was. I'll probably guess it's black because a lot of people wear black. Or I'll say it's dark, and I'll really be right. Look at how many people in here are wearing dark shirts, like 70% of you. So information becomes our locus of attention. It moves into our short-term memory. And if we keep focusing on it and we engage in memory techniques, then it becomes long-term memory. All right, short-term memory. Short-term memory, a lot of times we think of it as, right, what we're perceiving, right, what we're thinking about, what we're paying attention to. Here's something that researchers are looking at even more and more, however. That's a little bit different from the way you've probably been taught in the past. Short-term memory is actually a combination of perception and attention and long-term memory. For many years, researchers would just focus on perception and attention, right? That's what we've talked about in this class. But do you think that long-term memory has an effect on what's going on in your short-term memory and how easy it is to keep things in short-term memory? Absolutely, it does. Because remember, a couple classes back, we talked about how experience can affect how we perceive things. That's really what we're talking about. The knowledge that we have, our long-term memory, does affect how we interpret things in our short-term memory and how easy it is to remember something or even learn something new. It's a lot easier to learn something that's similar to knowledge we already have than something that's completely different. So you always want to remember, here's the bottom line. It is a combined focus of attention between perceptual memory and long-term memory. And that does have an effect on how we design. Now I'm going to do a quick exercise. Now, for those of you who have seen this, you're not allowed to say anything.
Illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
The correct answer is 16 passes.
Okay, did anyone get that?
Did you spot the gorilla?
All right.
For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla.
Okay. Did you guys see the gorilla? Now, how many of you have seen this before? Or something similar?
Similar.
Something similar, probably about half of you. Is there anyone who didn't see the gorilla? Who wants to admit it? Okay, one brave person. The other half of you who haven't seen it are probably lying. So, all right, so this is actually fairly well known. So a lot of people do see the gorilla. Let's see what else.
If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game?
I noticed the player. Yeah, I noticed the player was missing.
Yeah, who noticed the player? Now, did you notice the player was missing, or you actually saw the player leave?
I saw the player leave.
I think I heard like half and half. Who noticed the curtain? One person. Usually no one notices the curtain.
Let's rewind and watch it again.
Wow.
Here comes the gorilla, and there goes the player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Now, when you look at that background, it's like most of the screen. How could we miss that? Yes, and I did miss it the first time, by the way, also. Because what were you doing?
Because that wasn't our goal.
That wasn't your goal. Right? That's not what you were paying attention to. In fact, you weren't paying attention to anything in the background. You were only paying attention to the foreground. So even if you saw the gorilla, you were still paying attention to what was going on in that area. You weren't paying attention to what was going on behind them. Even though we look at it now, we're like, wow, what a big difference. We do this all the time. So that's something that's called change blindness. Right? So basically, we don't notice things we're not paying attention to. We do it all the time. And even things that we think are really, really obvious aren't. So I'm going to show you another video. Because one of the criticisms of the gorilla
The door study.
is that it's artificial. So let's look at something a little more real world.
This video shows a participant from a 1998 study by Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin. Watch what happens as the unsuspecting pedestrian provides directions. The young man on the left is one of the experimenters. He has approached the white-haired man and asked for directions. Watch closely as two people carrying a door pass between them, and the first experimenter is replaced by someone else. Like many of the people in this study, the pedestrian was entirely unaware that he was talking to a different person. Approximately 50% of the people approached in this study didn't notice when the person they were talking to was replaced by someone else. This study was among the first to demonstrate that change blindness can occur outside of the laboratory. This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin and is copyrighted.
So what do you think? I know, isn't that awesome? Yeah, there are actually a whole bunch of shows that have replicated this. I think, is it Dateline? Or I'm sorry?
Just for laughs.
Just for Laughs. One of the news shows. I think it was like Dateline, something or other. And they did it in New York City, and people just didn't notice. Right? There have been shows where they've actually had someone in a store helping a customer who has an eye patch and is wearing a neck brace. And when the customer turns around, they'll have, like someone bump into something, so the customer looks away. They took the eye patch off, or they switch eyes, right? Or they take the neck brace off, and they see if the person notices. And it's really funny because most of the time they don't notice, even something as obvious like a neck brace. Or in one of them, the guy even changes shirts. He goes from, I think, from a black shirt to a red shirt. So this is actually pretty common. Really important for us to think about when it comes to interface design, which we will be talking about on Tuesday. So have a great weekend.